Hear that? Believe it or not, summer is just around the corner. Luckily, Armor All, America's most trusted auto appearance brand, has what your car needs to get that perfect summer shine. Plus, now through May 31st, we'll give you $5 for every $20 you spend on Armor All products. That means car wash pods, protectant, tire shine, you name it. Find out how to get your $5 rebate at armorall.com. Armor All, less work, more clean. Terms apply.
The next time you're shopping for mountain bike gear, check out singletracks.com/deals. Each week, we share our favorite product picks and exclusive coupon codes from our partners. You can also use the page to search for whatever you're buying, from complete mountain bikes to brake sets and tire sealant. That's singletracks.com/deals. And to get our weekly picks delivered to your inbox, be sure to sign up for our newsletter. Links to the newsletter and deals page are in the show notes. Hey everybody, welcome to the Single Tracks podcast. My name is Jeff, and today my guest is Larry Pizzi. So Larry is the Chief Commercial Officer for Alta Cycling Group, which is the parent company of well-known bike brands, including Diamondback, Raleigh, and Ghost. He's also a board member at People for Bikes, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to making bicycling safer, easier to access, and more fun. Thanks for joining us, Larry.
Well, thanks for having me, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here.
You've been in the bike industry since before some of our listeners were born. How did you first get your start?
Well, I got sort of attracted to cycling as a teenager, growing up during the bicycle boom days of the early 1970s. And I really got interested in the European Grand Tours and the sport of road racing. That cast of, cycling greats like Giamondi and Merckx and the likes. I started racing bikes and working in a local bike shop where I grew up in Elkins Park, Pennsylvania, a suburban Philadelphia community, to be able to support the habit of buying bike parts.
Right. So, you mentioned that bikes were booming in the 70s, and, you've been in the industry for a long time. How has the bike industry changed over the years? Have there been a number of those booms, and what's kind of been your experience?
Yeah, well, it's changed pretty dramatically. I mean, back then the industry was really sort of Eurocentric. The component brands were brands like Campagnolo and Mavic, and there were small handcrafted builders like Cinelli and Mossi and Colnago, fast forward to today, everything sort of begins in Asia, with the supply chain on components, and the majority of frame sets are mass produced in factories from anywhere from northern China to Southeast Asia, and Vietnam is a very popular place. So huge changes for the industry. I think the product has come a long way. The advent of the mountain bike, I think that really caused the industry to innovate very significantly with, the advent of suspension technology and things that just would have never been considered if cycling stayed on paved surfaces.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, have you seen a shift too in terms of the type of riding that people are doing? It sounds like, in the 70s, it was this European sort of road flavor to the bike industry, or that's what was popular at that time. Have you seen sort of those shifts take place as well?
Yeah, definitely. When I was growing up, I think most people considered bikes, toys for kids. The ubiquitous bike under the Christmas tree was sort of the norm. And, what really lured me in was, sort of this professional road racing mentality. And, there's been a huge shift. I think that in the course of my career, owning bike shops for about 15 years before I jumped into the other side of the industry, I got to live through sort of the BMX era, which made people think about bikes on dirt.
Yeah.
And that was a pretty cool phenomenon that sort of, I think spurred the advent of the mountain bike.
Mm-hmm.
And, what's interesting to me is there are some things that are driving people, off of paved surfaces and causing people to seek out, safer and more laid back places to ride, which I think is really cool.
Yeah. So it's still sort of a recreational thing for people, but more not just kids anymore, right? Like anybody can go out and have fun on a bike. And, you mentioned sort of getting off road is becoming more popular. It seems like gravel, especially right now, is a real growth area for biking, at least, especially here in the United States. Why do you think that's so popular?
Well, it's interesting because I didn't know a whole heck of a lot about, gravel roads or primitive roads or,
Mm-hmm.
Fire access trails until I started getting involved with the work that we do at People for Bikes and advocating for, for the industry. And, come to find that there are literally hundreds of thousands of miles of gravel roads or, fire access roads and trails, into wilderness areas all around the country that make some pretty cool places to ride, for certain kinds of applications. And, gravel is taking off. And I really think that there are a couple of drivers. First, I think both, hardcore avid cyclists and recreational fitness riders are afraid of distracted drivers. And second, I think riding on mixed surfaces, these primitive roads and fire trails, is just centered around having fun out there on a bike, as opposed to, sort of the typical sufferfest that, sometimes is, the competitive side of our sport. And, it enables people to, just go out for a ride with friends and family, not the extreme, hucking off jumps and the adrenaline experience that, is sometimes mountain biking,
Mm-hmm.
or the, sort of aero go fast, road bike experience. So I think it's really compelling to me.
Yeah, it's sort of a middle ground between road biking and mountain biking, not too extreme in either sense. You mentioned distracted drivers, and I think that's interesting. I mean, obviously, drivers have always been distracted, but what's changed is cell phones, right? I mean, I guess that's a problem that riders are aware of, and they're seeking safer places to ride. And also, I think it's interesting, and maybe this is just a temporary thing, but right now, during this, pandemic, a lot of people are choosing to ride from home, or they're forced to ride from home, not allowed to go out and travel. And it seems like a gravel bike opens up a lot more opportunities in terms of, like you said, mixed road rides and being able to do that sort of close to home.
Yeah, definitely. I think, a gravel bike is sort of like a multi-tool. You can ride it on pavement. You can ride it on, crush and run trails. You can ride it on dirt. And it enables people to sort of go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think calling them gravel bikes, is not a perfect definition, but that's what we've all in the industry sort of landed on as a descriptor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what would be a better name for them?
Yeah, I mean, we've used all road or any road
Mm-hmm.
as descriptors. We find people are a lot of times consumers are asking questions about, well, how wide of a tire can you put on? And if you put on this wide tire, can you, put on fenders? And it's like, fenders? Why would you want fenders? But, people are clearly using them for more than just riding on gravel for fun or fitness.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it seems like even calling it mixed road is too limiting, because a lot of people think, I'll take it on single track a little bit too, especially the mountain bikers who are maybe a little more confident in their skills, or who are just kind of looking to make their local trails more challenging. So it is hard to put a label on exactly what these bikes are.
Yeah, no question. I was out for a ride on my mountain bike on a local trail network here in Maryland the other day, and there was a guy that zoomed past me on a gravel bike on these trails. It's people with greater skill set than I for riding single track can do some pretty amazing things.
Yeah, for sure. So what does the average gravel bike customer look like? Are you seeing more road riders who are looking to get off roads, like you said, to get away from the cell phone drivers? Or is it mountain bikers who are moving toward these like longer mixed surface rides? Or is it like a completely new category of rider?
Well, I think it's actually all three, but it's new riders that really get me excited as a marketer. Anytime we can get someone to consider getting on a bike, any kind of bike, instead of doing something else for sport or fitness or transportation or recreation is a great thing for for us and the bike industry, and I think the community at large. It really is attractive that, it's luring new riders. But, certainly, we have some bunch of road bike riders that, like we talked about earlier, are really concerned about, those distracted by smartphones and, sort of the awareness of people getting clipped by a car due to social media, and then I think it's attractive to a lot of mountain bike riders too that are just looking for something else to do, and to take advantage of this huge network of primitive roads around the country.
Yeah, interesting. Well, thinking of new riders, it seems like people that I know, who sort of know me casually and know that I do what I do, they say, oh, I'm thinking about getting a bike. And, 9 times out of 10 seems like they're looking at a hybrid bike because they're like, oh, well, maybe I want to take it on the road. Maybe I want to take it on the trail. And hybrids to me never seemed like a great solution for either of those. But gravel bikes, I don't know, they just seem, at least they seem cooler. Right? Like, is that something that you're seeing, that people are recognizing that kind of versatility of the bike as far as new riders go?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes from sort of the advice they get from a friend or an avid cyclist that they look to, or somebody at the local bike shop that is making a recommendation about what kind of bike somebody should get based on the kind of riding they're thinking about doing. And gravel bikes are so incredibly versatile. I mean, they can be comfortable and sturdy commuters. They can be great recreational bikes. You can choose to go on the crush and run rails to trails thing with your family, or you can take it off road or even on single track, as we mentioned earlier. So, having that versatility for a consumer, I think, is one reason to buy. And I think as people learn more about cycling, they wind up coming to the realization that, wow, bikes sort of are, somewhat function specific. And, if I'm having a great time riding single track, I would sure be nice to have, a fully that, you can maximize that experience on. But, for people just getting started or getting back into cycling, I think, gravel bike's a great choice.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask you a personal question now. How many bikes do you own?
Oh, geez. Too many is probably the right answer.
Okay.
I have a hard time parting with bikes. I get my heartstrings sort of attached, and whenever a bike box shows up on my doorstep, the first question my wife asks is, okay, which one are you going to get rid of?
Right.
I've got a lot of spaces filled with bikes, but, I think like everyone, you love a bike, you had a great experience on a particular bike, but new technology comes along and you you wind up displacing it. Certainly in my role, I have the opportunity, to try out the latest and greatest, and inevitably I wind up getting one that I can keep.
Yeah. Well, do you think that a gravel bike replaces one or more bikes in other people's sheds, or do you think it is more of one of these precision tools? I know for me, it feels like maybe I could get away with replacing like my road bike and maybe my hardtail with a gravel bike. Are you seeing that, or do you think a gravel bike really is like a specialized tool that people are going to want to have in their shed in addition to all those other bikes?
I think for an enthusiast, it's a precision device. It's something, for a specific kind of ride. Mm-hmm. But, for, someone that is just getting back in, or, doesn't already own, a hardtail mountain bike, or, a performance or endurance road bike, it can replace, those bikes. But it's interesting. I think enthusiasts are being intrigued by the category, and wind up buying a gravel specific bike for a very specific kind of an intent. Mm-hmm. And the less inclined are choosing it as a multi-tool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, given that, what are sort of the price points for gravel bikes compared to, say, a mountain or road bike? Are people willing to spend like $10,000 on a gravel bike right now?
Yeah, I wish. But no, $1,500 to $2,000 is the largest price band, with $1,000 to $1,500 sort of being right behind. So that, $1,000 to $2,000 range right now makes up the largest part of the category. Mm-hmm. But there's definitely growth as we innovate the product at higher price points. Whenever a category begins to take off in our industry, everybody jumps in and starts to innovate and invest in engineering and development. And $3,000 to $6,000 range, we're seeing some nice growth. It's encouraging. Of course, we love to sell, premium products, being enthusiasts.
Right.
And, but quite honestly, there's very little in the $10,000 level. I mean, there's a little bit of activity, but no, not yet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how does that compare? You mentioned $1,000 to $2,000 is kind of the sweet spot for gravel right now. Is that similar to road bikes and mountain bikes? I mean, I'm not even sure, right, from the demand side, if that's a lot or a little.
Yeah, no, it's anytime that you're in the $1,500 to $2,000 range, that constitutes a quality premium product for an average consumer. We sort of separate the enthusiasts from sort of the average person going into a bike shop looking to either get back into cycling or doing it for the first time perhaps. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty good. That's a pretty significant spend for the average consumer. So I would say that it's moving in the right direction. When the category first started, it was really even sub $1,000 that people were, maybe looking to just test the waters. And, the industry was not really willing to commit. The early stage gravel bikes were, steel frames that didn't require a huge investment in tooling. And now you're seeing some really pretty beautiful, carbon bikes with some interesting modern geometries, a little slacker front end. That we can really see that the engineers are starting to focus on the category and do some pretty cool stuff.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it sort of reminds me of fat bikes and how that was sort of rolled out at the lower price points, never really got to the super high ones. But I think the big difference is, Fat biking is very specific and very niche. You need to live somewhere where there's a lot of snow or some other unusual conditions, whereas gravel, though it's kind of starting out similarly, it seems like it has a lot more room for growth.
Yeah, I completely agree. Fat bikes are still going strong in the upper tier of the Midwest, where people ride in the winter and soft surfaces and snow and stuff. But they're not really popular, as popular as they were when they first got going, when a lot of people were sort of testing the waters. I don't see that happening with gravel. I think gravel is here to stay as a category, and I think it's going to continue to innovate.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned earlier that gravel is attractive to people because, in a lot of ways it's about having fun, and it's not about the sufferfests or even competition necessarily, but humans are competitive people, right? We're a competitive species. And so there's certainly gravel racing already exists, and just seems like that's going to progress even further. Do you see that happening? Is this something that might fit into like a World Cup model eventually?
Well, I think racing is definitely coming on in the category. I see all kinds of competitive cyclists getting into it, and most of the events always turn into some type of race for those, up for the challenge. There's so many gravel events on the calendar now. And there's some ones with great notoriety, and people are flocking to them. And I think, this is the part that's really attractive to me. You can get the hardcore enthusiasts that want to ride competitively involved in these things because, off the front always turns into a race. And, then their families, it's just all about finishing. And, I think the racing side is definitely coming on. I even think that triathlon will at some point wind up integrating gravel into their sport.
Wow, a gravel time trial bike. I want to see that. I want to see what they do to a gravel bike to make it weird.
Well, I think, for the same reason that, endurance road riders or sport road riders are looking to get off of paved surfaces, triathletes are sort of doing the same thing. And it's a different kind of workout. I don't know that we're going to have the super bikes of triathlon in gravel. I don't know that aero comes into play all that much, but certainly it's a kind of endurance that is sort of interesting to a lot of triathletes. We sponsor a female triathlete on our Diamondback squad that. She loves it. She thinks gravel is the next best thing, and a lot of the folks that are really close to the sport, have said, "Yep, this is coming on." So don't be surprised by that.
Yeah, interesting. Well, are there any access issues associated with gravel riding? Groups like IMBA have sort of a formula for getting single track trails built, but no one, as far as I know, is building new gravel roads or pushing to have them open to bikes. Is that something that you are familiar with or have looked at, particularly with your work for People for Bikes?
That's a great question. I think, there's very little from an access perspective that I'm aware of. And I think, as we said at the onset, there are literally hundreds of thousands of miles of fire roads and fire trails and primitive roads, in a lot of places that most people didn't even know existed, until these events started popping up. And, I think bikes have open access to those places. From an access perspective, I think, the biggest challenge for mountain biking, and I was there at the onset of the mountain bike when trails started getting, shuttered, is, we're not encroaching really on wilderness areas with these kinds of, primitive roads. So it's much less controversial.
Yeah. Well, yeah, still, though, I wonder if, as this becomes more popular, are there going to be access issues like, search and rescue, for instance, if people are getting farther out into these backcountry areas on roads that, are or forgotten, or, a lot of these probably aren't even mapped anymore, right? They're overgrown or they're not used, or maybe they are used. Maybe they're active fire roads and there are issues with hordes of people going out there when they need to be used for some emergency purposes. So do you think that's something that people are considering? I mean, it sounds like they're not considering it, but do you think that's something down the road that might be a problem?
Well, I really haven't heard of it being a problem or getting called out. I don't see a lot of activity around the advocacy side on this. And I do think that, the various land management agencies, at the federal and state level, they do utilize these roads primarily for, emergency fire access and so on. So, they can get a vehicle on these things, when they need to. And, that really cuts down the concern about, how do you access somebody that's gotten seriously injured?
True. Yeah.
So it's much less of a thing than it is in mountain biking.
Yeah. Are there certain areas of the country where access to gravel is better than others? I mean, we kind of think that there are definitely more gravel roads around than there are trails, but I wonder if certain parts of the country have better access than others.
Yeah, I think the western states, have more. There are places, all around the country where there's, these kinds of primitive roads. I lived until I recently moved back east in 2017. For 25 years, I lived in Southern California, so I've sort of limited experience. Riding all over the country with these on these kinds of primitive roads. But based on what I've learned in my really history working with people for bikes, there's a lot of these things in many places. When the category first hit, we started hearing from bike dealers, gravel. What do you mean gravel? We don't have any gravel roads where we are. And, we sort of concluded that was coming from sort of urban, retailers. But, as you get out into the more rural areas, I think there's plenty of places to ride. Sometimes they're not public lands, though. Sometimes they're private lands. And, circling back to your comment about access, I guess that could become a problem if, hordes of people wind up showing up on private lands for a cycling event.
Yeah, and I guess, there probably isn't much threat of it, but I assume gravel roads are occasionally paved due to demands of, people who live on them or whatever. And also, I'm sure a lot of them are being overgrown, right? If they're not maintained or used for vehicle access anymore, they could get overgrown. But I'm a mountain biker, so that just sounds good to me. The more it can get overgrown, the more we can, kind of turn it back into single track. But yeah, it is interesting to think about sort of how that maybe is similar or different to mountain bike advocacy.
Yeah, exactly.
So the Alta Cycling Group is very active in the electric bike space as well. And this is another, seemingly really high growth area for bike sales at the moment. Is there any crossover between these two trends, between gravel and electric bikes?
Well, a little bit, for sure, in a sense that those not inclined to get on a bike might consider riding under more ideal circumstances. I think with e-bikes, they level the playing field, so everyone can get out and have a good time. Right. With gravel, it's great to see families just riding for fun, but it's still a significant. You have to be relatively fit to to go out and really have fun on a long gravel ride. So, I think it's a little different target group. There's a little bit of crossover, but in many senses, not really.
So for mountain bikers who've been riding for a long time, it sort of initially felt like e-bikes were being pushed by manufacturers more than they were being demanded by the riders themselves. Is that fair to say, or are you now seeing like a real demand for electric bikes in the U.S. among people who are riding off-road?
Well, e-bikes are the fastest growing category in the U.S. bike industry right now. And gravel bikes are the second fastest growing category.
All right. We got the two. We got the two right here.
Two subjects nailed.
Yeah.
Riding e-bikes off of paved surfaces, was pretty controversial to start. One of our brands in our portfolio is a German brand called Highbike, and I'm responsible for for bringing Highbike to the United States a handful of years ago, and sort of starting this craze. Some of the work that we do at People for Bikes is advocate for access for e-bikes. And we don't believe that they should be able to go anywhere a mountain bike can go. But, I think that there are plenty of places that, they're not problematic. And, I really, throughout my history and involvement with cycling, the thing that sends me the biggest thrill is when we can get someone off of their couch or out of their car and onto a bicycle, and any bicycle at all. And, the great thing about e-bikes is that they just make cycling more accessible for people. And, I think it's with these pedal assist e-mountain bikes that are currently being marketed, we call them Class 1 bikes that utilize sort of cadence and torque and, actuate the motor in sort of harmony with your human power input. You can actually get quite a nice workout.
Definitely.
It's interesting to see that a lot of, mountain bike enthusiasts are even embracing the category so that they can get a couple more runs in, than they normally would on an acoustic bike, as we refer to them. And I think the other thing that's really wonderful is that a lot of people are finding sort of joy in being able to go out for a ride and bring their family along, their spouse or significant other, because, as I said before, they totally level the playing field. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I think, there's been some fear from the mountain bike community that, they're going to wind up causing issues with trail closures. But we haven't seen any of that at this stage of the game. I think people are, trying to be responsible. I mean, it's hard to control everything that people do. I mean, we have bad citizens that ride mountain bikes, and we have bad citizens that ride electric mountain bikes. But, for the most part, I think that the industry is really trying to do the right thing. We need it. It's, the industry hasn't, in the U.S., seen a lot of growth. It's been, pretty flat for the last 10 or 15 years. And, we need something that's going to, cause people to, to make a decision to get on a bike versus doing something else. I see it only as a positive thing.
Yeah. Well, looking at electric bikes as a whole, where do you see sort of that shaking out in the future in terms of the mix? Like are electric bikes, is this like a mountain bike thing, or is mountain biking like just a small subset of what electric bikes are actually going to end up doing in the U.S., I guess? Are they more commuters, or is mountain biking like a pretty solid use case for electric bikes?
That's a really good question, and I don't know that we know the answer to that at this stage of the game. But I'll tell you this today, off-road e-bikes, e-mountain bikes, or there's even e-gravel bikes on the market today. are about a third of the total revenue. They tend to be higher price because of suspension and the technology, and they're probably about 20% of the total units being sold.
Okay.
So definitely more people are using e-bikes on paved surfaces or sort of bike infrastructure rather than on off-road trails. But for the same reason cyclists are moving off-road because of distracted drivers. I think there are more e-bike riders that are attracted to to riding, not necessarily on single track, although there certainly are some. A lot of e-mountain bike riders would be very happy riding on some of these primitive roads we're talking about.
Yeah.
Just to get away from car traffic. I see it growing, and it's attracting more people. It's very interesting to me that we're starting to see a consumer emerge in this category that ride off-road motorcycles. And you talk about sort of restrictions and what you have to do to find a place to legally ride an off-road motorcycle in most places in the country. You can ride a bike out your back door to a trailhead, and so we've been at People for Bikes advocating for e-mountain bike access in a responsible way, where it doesn't put access to mountain bikes at risk.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of places, and we hope that there'll be a lot more places to ride in the coming years. We focus primarily on because it's sort of governed state by state and not sort of a federal rule. These three different classes of e-bikes, because they're so broad in their description, but we've categorized them. Class 1 is just a pedal assist bike where the motor cuts off when the bike reaches a speed of 20 miles an hour. Class 2 is the same thing, but it might have a throttle, which is not really appropriate for off-road riding.
Yeah.
And then Class 3 is a bike that is a pedal assist bike that the motor doesn't cut off until the bike gets to 28 miles an hour. And so we're seeing people choose these higher speed Class 3 bikes a lot of times for commuting. And what's really cool there is that we're seeing enthusiasts make the choice of buying one of these Class 3 bikes and abandoning, their car, for getting to work. And, Class 1, I think is a wonderful thing, for a recreational rider or, a mild sport rider, or those of us that are having trouble keeping up with our friends on a mountain bike ride. Yeah. I got, I've been getting a little tired of waving goodbye about 15 minutes into the ride with some of the folks that I ride with.
Yeah. Well, which of those classes is kind of more popular with consumers? I mean, I guess it depends on what they're planning to do with them. And in terms of mountain biking, though, Class 2, there's not much access for that as far as trails go. So I would imagine that one is not very popular. But what are you seeing when people are deciding on mountain bikes? Are they more interested in Class 1 or Class 3?
Well, Class 1, most of the places where we've gotten, access has sort of relegated access to these Class 1 bikes. And, some people say, wow, 20 miles an hour, that's so fast. Well, you don't climb at 20 miles an hour. you maybe climb, 2 or 3 miles an hour faster than, an unpowered bike.
Right.
It certainly depends on, how you dial in the assist level. But most people don't ride on maximum assist level because it just sucks up, battery, and then you don't have much ride time. You can ride a pretty significant distance and get a good workout. I mean, there's a lot of data that shows, the health benefits of riding a pedal assist e-bike, and people are really attracted to it. Probably a month doesn't go by where I don't get an impassioned email from someone that that bought a bike, one of these Class 1 e-mountain bikes, and has written to me that saying how it's it's changed their life, and there's usually some health benefit issue that goes along with it. Either they've aged out, or they have knee or hip problems, or heart issues, or whatever it might be that caused them to have to put their their cycling aside as they've gotten older, and they're back on the bike and losing weight and getting healthier, and that's really compelling to me.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned how People for Bikes has been successful at getting e-bike access on trails in a number of states. And it's quite impressive. I mean, the amount of progress that's been made on that front in just a few short years. Are there things that other bike advocates can learn from sort of how this was accomplished? I mean, it seems like legislatures, they aren't usually talking about bikes. Like they don't understand them. And it seems rare that cyclists are able to get, so much legislation passed. So what's been kind of the key to that?
Well, I think the key to it has been that we've sort of learned from, advocating for mountain biking, how to advocate for e-mountain biking. Because I lived through this period during the advent of the mountain bike where, trails were just getting closed left and right. And, that was really a result of the industry, inventing a product and, just pushing it out on the marketplace without sort of getting in front of it.
Sort of like electric scooters, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. We said, okay, this is going to be an issue if we don't start the process of, teaching people about, what this is all about. Because everybody, when you say electric bike, thinks that it's a motorcycle.
Yeah.
And when you get on one of them and, you have the opportunity to demo one of these Class 1 pedal assist mountain bikes to someone that's uninitiated, they go, wow, that's completely different than what I expected. It's, it's really a bike, and, I don't really, it's nothing like what I anticipated. So we did just that. We started, we actually, one of the first things we did is that we did an environmental impact study by hiring IMBA Trail Solutions to do it for us. They were very apprehensive at first, and basically their position was, well, we don't have anything against these things. They just shouldn't be allowed where mountain bikes are allowed. They're fine where motorized vehicles are allowed, but not where mountain bikes are allowed. And they sort of came around to a certain extent after we did this environmental impact study that basically showed that these things were about as close to a normal mountain bike as they possibly could be, and completely different from an impact perspective. And then, we turned towards the social impacts because that was the next thing that was raised, that it was going to cause user conflicts out on the trail. And we did, the first social impact study that we did was in Fruta. And, we interviewed hundreds of people that were riding mountain bikes on the trail at the trailhead. And a lot of people didn't even realize that there are, e-mountain bikes in the mix. And those that did said, yeah, I don't really have a problem with them. A couple people, said, yeah, those damn things, they shouldn't be allowed on the trail. But, I think for the most part, the mountain bike community is slowly but surely sort of becoming more open-minded. And I think, like I've said, we're trying to be responsible. Can't always control what everybody does, but, we've done a lot of work, with the various land management agencies doing, these regional workshops where we get, rangers and enforcement folks on these things, so they have an understanding. They know what they look like, and they know what the expectations are. They have a better understanding of the product and the core riders, and we invite them in to have a conversation about it, along with mountain bike user groups and such, and they've been incredibly productive. We're actually really sorry that this year they've all been canceled because of the COVID situation, but we've made great progress by doing that, and then letting the agencies and the community sort of decide how they want to handle them. Consumers are buying them, they're showing up, and we just want to make sure that users understand where they're legal to ride and where they're not legal to ride.
Right. Yeah. You make a really good point about e-bikes in particular, but I think it's true about all bikes that once somebody gets a chance to ride one and to really get a feel for it and understand what it's like, then I think they can more effectively, govern it or regulate it or whatever the case may be. And, you see that in bike commuting all the time as well. People don't understand the need for, dedicated bike lanes until they're on a bike on the road and cars are whizzing past them and they say, yeah, okay, I get it now, like why this needs to exist. And so, yeah, it seems like all types of bike advocates could learn from that in terms of like making bikes available for people and setting up events where, key stakeholders can try riding one and see what it's like. And, they don't have to love it, but they at least hopefully they can understand it a little better.
Yeah, I think from a bicycle advocacy perspective, e-bikes really help in any category, because just getting people on a bike, any kind of bike, changes people's perception and about cycling in general. And the more people that are exposed to cycling, the better it is for every kind of cyclist. And it's interesting because back in the 70s when I was growing up, there was this whole environmental thing. And that was the reason to ride, because it was good for planet Earth,
right.
to get out of your gas guzzling car and onto a bike for whatever, reason. And it was, started out a little bit as a hippy dippy kind of a, thing to do. But, then, businessmen were, riding their bike in the inner city to commute to work because they saw, there was significant efficiency, and, people started, the fitness and sport trends started to build. And, what we didn't do in this country was, a lot of European countries where cycling is really ingrained into the culture. We didn't sort of penalize people for driving cars and invest in, building better infrastructure for cycling. Everybody points to the Netherlands about how, so many Dutch, just, from a use perspective, the Dutch are number one in terms of, using bicycles for transportation. And, I think had we done the same back in the 70s, where there was this opportunity to really, there was an awareness about cycling, there was an opportunity to sort of build that infrastructure that would have kept more people riding, we sort of turned back to subsidizing the fossil fuel industry, and that infrastructure didn't get built. And it's circled back around to some extent, and it's happening in places, and certainly in in really congested cities, and more people are using bikes for transportation than I think ever before in the United States. It's really good to see. And I think that spawns people to, use bikes for other activities, like sport and recreation, which is awesome.
Yeah. Well, as someone who owned local bike shops for many years, what are the challenges and opportunities even for brick and mortar retailers today?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is that the consumer has access to all the information available on the web in their pocket, on their smartphones today. And, so retailers can't just, show up and rely on being a knowledge resource anymore. They've got to find some other way to add value and, providing great service and creating sort of communities, within their stores, being sort of the epicenter for that community is essential. And, that really creates some very positive things. But for a lot of retailers, especially those that have been around for a while, it means change. And, people are so, resistant to change. And it takes energy, So, those that are open, to changing in that regard, open to consumers no matter how they engage, are doing really well. The ones that are stuck and resistant to the change are, for the most part, really struggling. And there's a pretty good mix of both right now. The folks that have figured it out, are high-fiving and doing well. And those that just show up and expect that people are going to line up at their front door are, it's like, well, what's happening? Floor traffic is way down. But it's, I think it's all about information. And there's a lot of great information on the web.
Yeah. Well, if you were to open up a bike shop today, what would it look like? I mean, how would it be, small sales floor and, big shop area? Would it be a coffee shop / bike shop? I mean, what would you do if you were? I mean, you mentioned if you're someone who's been in the industry a while, it's tough to change. But, if you had a clean slate, what would you kind of see as a good model for people going forward?
Well, I think it depends on sort of the geographic area that you're in and whether it's, urban, suburban, or rural. In an urban market, retail space is expensive these days. So, the 10,000 square foot bike shop is probably not going to make it in an urban area. I had 3 stores in Philadelphia. One was right in Center City, Philadelphia. I couldn't do what we did, back then.
Yeah.
So I think it would be downsized, more boutique-y. I think I'd rely on, digital resources and, having sort of a showroom where you can, really have sort of a fusion of online and in-store. I think that's the future.
Yeah.
For retail today, especially in those urban centers. The more suburban stores, they can be a little bit bigger with more product on the floor. But you still have to fuse online and in store and provide sort of an incredible customer experience to be successful today.
Yeah. So after gravel bikes and electric bikes, what's next? What do you see as the next big trend? I know we're like kind of in the middle or even maybe kind of the beginning of both of these, but is there anything else on the horizon that you could foresee as maybe becoming big one day?
It's a great question. I have some thoughts, but I have no desire to share.
All right. Playing it close to the vest.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think that it's hard to predict. We see trends developing, that could turn into the next big thing. But I think we have a very long way to go to maximize our opportunity around gravel and e-bikes, and one that could last, decades more. We're just scratching the surface, I think. And, it's all about getting more people riding and riding more often. The interesting thing is, in this period of COVID, we're starting to see another bike boom. The streets are quieter. They're not as trafficked. And, in the neighborhood where I live, it's just really encouraging to see, families out riding with their kids and discovering how much fun cycling can be. So who knows? We might be seeing, that 70 bike boom days triggered by COVID-19.
Yeah. Well, how important, though, is it to be sort of at the forefront of these trends? It seems like with a lot of this stuff, it kind of bubbles up from the smaller brands first, right? And I can't think of any cases where big brands have just completely dropped the ball, so to speak, right? Like 29ers took a while for the bigger players to come out with those bikes, but eventually they did, when the time was right, when the volumes were high enough. And yeah, so how important are the trends really when it comes to big brands like yours?
Yeah, I think that a lot of times you're right. Small brands sort of create those trends, and as it develops, the larger, sometimes more savvy companies decide when to pull the trigger and make the investment to get behind it when they're confident that trend is ready for prime time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon. I mean, we have some big global brands in the U.S. That are dominant players on a lot of fronts. But I think the interesting thing about the bike industry is that there's always room for smaller companies to be successful if they can really focus in and identify their target consumer and really listen to what the consumer is saying and develop product that really meets their needs.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Larry, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. I know I learned a lot about the industry, and I'm sure our listeners will as well, so thanks.
My pleasure, Jeff. Thanks for having me.